Hello and welcome to another episode of Cracking Addiction. My name is Philippe Nurin and I'm joined as always by Fergal Armstrong. In the episode of Cracking Addiction today, we're going to be talking about how to maintain a patient on long-acting injectable buprenorphine and how to deal with some of the frequently encountered complications and questions that patients often ask us. So Fergal, one of the things that I encounter quite frequently when I've started someone on a LAIB is that the patient complains that the dose is not sufficient and they ask if I can do anything to increase the dose or adjust the dose. So essentially asking for a top-up dose. What's your approach to this and how do you manage a situation like this?
Yeah, that's a very common scenario, especially in that phase of time when you're trying to get to steady state. So before you've hit the fourth or the fifth injection, people really haven't reached steady state and they're just not yet controlled. So, if you're using Buvidal, Buvidal's got quite a wide range of doses, and Buvidal's got quite a wide range of dosing intervals. So, if someone's on a low to moderate dose of Buvidal, then it's perfectly reasonable to either increase the dose of the Buvidal and or to give the next injection earlier. Because remember, with Buvidal monthly, you've got a dose range of 3 to 5 weeks. So if someone's expecting an injection on week 4 and they're feeling they're not quite controlled and they present in week 3, well, it's really easy. Just give them another dose. And it's not unusual to be dosing people with Buvidal early, especially until they get to the fourth or the fifth injection. However, if you're going to give top-ups, the product information for Buvidal says that you can give an 8 milligram dose of sublingual buprenorphine once in every dosing window. So that would be once in every week for Buvidal weekly and once in every month for Buvidal monthly. In clinical practice, I would say if someone's really in need of top-up doses, then I would give the next injection earlier. You could give maintenance top-up doses of sublingual buprenorphine until the next injection was available, but I've never actually had to do that. I've always been in a clinical situation where I've had the availability of stock of Buvidal. It's slightly different with Sublocade. So the Sublocade's product information allows you to give 8 milligrams daily of sublingual buprenorphine every day for 14 days within a dosing window. And I actually find that given that the half-life of Sublocade is longer than the half-life of Buvidal monthly, so Buvidal monthly's half-life is 19 to 25 days, whereas Sublocade's half-life is 43 to 60 days. You tend not to get the issue of, the injection's not holding me as it should do. So it's rarer. In my clinical experience, it's rarer. The problem that I have with patients sometimes on Sublocade is that they present too early. So the dosing window for Sublocade is minus 2 days to plus 14 days. So it's every 26 to 42 days. And if patients come back on the 25th day, 26th day, just for convenience sake, what do? Do you give it early, even though it's outside that window? The product information would say, well, no, you don't. But in reality, I think you probably would, especially if it was a 100 milligram dose.
Absolutely. And I think what you've just stated is kind of reflected in my own clinical practice, where sometimes when I'm starting a patient out on an LAIB, usually Buvidal, I will occasionally give a couple of top-up weekly injections, the 8 milligram injections to a maximum of 32 milligrams per week. But usually the patient does settle down after that initial teething period. A question that sometimes arises, though, is titrating the dose, the patient not feeling that the dose is suitable and wanting to either go up or feeling a bit sedated and wanting to go down. How do you manage this in clinical practice?
So with Buvidal, it's fairly easy. There's a wide dose range. So if someone's on a middle dose of a monthly Buvidal and they feel they want to go down, it's very easy. Just the next injection, instead of giving them 96, drop them down to 64. And if they're not controlled, then give the next dose earlier or go up to the higher dose, which is 128. And then, of course, we're going to be able to get the 160 milligram product as well. With Sublocade, if they're not being held, that would usually be in a situation where during the titration phase, when they haven't hit that fourth or fifth injection, then I would use top-up doses, because remember, we're expecting to use 300 for the first 2 months. If they're really not controlled after the second 300 injection, then I would be tempted to continue 300 for a maintenance phase. So the indications for maintenance on 300 is persistent use on top, persistent craving despite adequate psychosocial support, et cetera, et cetera. So you can use the 300 as a maintenance dose, but it's not proven to be any benefit, and actually the evidence suggests all it does is increase the side effects. But for some people, it is absolutely necessary, because remember, for some people, they're used to being on 32 milligrams of sublingual buprenorphine, or in fact more, daily, and that can be associated with significant variations in peaks and troughs. So, it's all about advising patients that they are going to feel different when they transition from sublingual buprenorphine to LAIB.
Absolutely. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked about the timing of doses for LAIB, but what do you do with a patient that's come in for a delayed dose or a missed dose? What's your approach in dealing with this complication?
Yeah, so the advent of LAIBs has really made services really think about how they deliver services to patients. It used to be the guidance suggested if you miss 5 days of either sublingual buprenorphine or methadone, then you've lost your tolerance and you need to be retitrated. Easy, right? Now, if someone presents 5 days after their 28-day mark for an LAIB injection, they're still within the potential effective dosing of that LAIB, especially at steady state. So we need to understand the tail. So remember, the tail is what I refer to as the persistent elevation of plasma buprenorphine levels after steady state when you stop administering. So the tail for Buvidal weekly is about 3 weeks, and the tail for Buvidal monthly is about 3 months. And the tail for Sublocade, if you're maintaining on 100 milligrams, is about 2 months. And the tail for Sublocade 300, if you're maintaining on 300, is about 5 months. So you've got all this time when you still have an effective dose in someone who may have missed a dose. So that's why we now see people who, they get stabilized, they go wandering, and they come back months late. And you'd expect them to be in withdrawal, and they're not in withdrawal, and they're perfectly controlled, in which case, well, you just give them the next injection, because they're people for whom, luckily enough, their treatment regime allows them 2 monthly or even 3 monthly dosing. So we've had to reconsider in our services. Patients may not turn up for appointments, but that's okay. And the next time they turn up, they just have to have the injection. The issue then becomes, how do you manage people who are not yet titrated, who have not yet reached equilibrium, and they're presenting late, more than the 5 weeks for Buvidal, or more than 2 weeks late after Sublocade, and they haven't yet reached that steady state. Do you retitrate, or do you just give them the next injection when it's due? And I think it's a judgment call. What would you say to that, Philippe?
I'd agree. It is usually a judgment call. Personally, I retitrate, but that's just to be doubly sure that we've got that baseline plasma level of buprenorphine that we're aiming for. Is that somewhat similar to what you do?
Yeah, as I said, it's a judgment. And the thing is, it's also complicated. What do you do if someone says they're using on top? Do you not inject them? They may have used on top yesterday. They're not in withdrawal because they've still got buprenorphine on board, or they're not in withdrawal because they're flooded with full mu agonists, and you give them the next injection. Are you going to cause a precipitated withdrawal? It can be a bit tricky to work that one out.
Absolutely. It can be. Yeah. So going to another question that we sometimes get, how do you switch from Buvidal weekly to monthly, or vice versa? Do you have an approach to that?
Yeah, look, you just go back to the standard dosing regime that the product information supplies. And so basically when the next injection is due, if you want to go into a monthly, just go to the equivalent monthly dose, and vice versa. If you want to go down to weekly, go to the equivalent weekly dose. The more interesting issue is, how do you switch between Buvidal and Sublocade? Now, the question is, why would you want to? If someone's maintained on Buvidal monthly, and then they want to perhaps, do work away and maybe do get some FIFO work, and then you really want that long-lasting injection. If someone's stabilized on high-dose Buvidal monthly, you might just get away with, the next injection, administering them with 100 milligrams of Sublocade. But if someone's not controlled on Buvidal at high doses, let's say 128 monthly or even 160 monthly, then I don't think that you would you would have to put them onto the 300 for at least for a couple of months to see how they were before before you could say, okay, I'm happy that they're stabilized. Now, going the other way, I think you'd get them down to the 100 milligram Sublocade monthly, and then go on to you could then basically just wait for the long tail and then start sublingual buprenorphine if you wanted to. Or if you wanted to, and then from that go on to Buvidal, or if you wanted to do a direct switch, go down to the 100 milligrams monthly, and then maybe go to a 128 of Buvidal, and then move from a 128 down the dosing range, down to maybe 64, and then down onto weeklies, and then titrate down that way. There are options. This is the thing about Buvidal. It's so flexible. It gives you plenty of options.
And following this to the logical conclusion, what happens if you have a patient who wants to stop the depot? How would you approach someone who no longer wants to be on LAIB and manage them through that time period?
Well, the first thing I want to know is why. Because, in our clinical experience, I think you'd agree with me, Philippe, that LAIB is transformative. And for those people who are tolerant of buprenorphine, it really does free people from the shackles of addiction and the shackles of dependency and the shackles of being stuck to the pharmacy, having to turn up every day. It's a great product. Both of these products are fabulous and they're transformative, right? So why would a patient want to stop? Now, if they're not controlled, well, then surely the right treatment would be to find out why they're not controlled. What can we do to improve control? If, however, they've just had enough and that's it, there's no talking them around, how do you stop? The key thing about stopping LAIB is, first of all, understanding the long tail and then working out what's the next plan. So if we go back to the long tail, we need to appreciate that at steady state, once you stop, then you've got a long tail for Sublocade of 2 to 5 months. And you've got a long tail for Buvidal. For weekly Buvidal, it's 3 weeks, and for monthly Buvidal, it's 3 months. Right? So you have to appreciate that they're still going to be controlled with that medication potentially till that time. So there's no point admitting people for a detox off LAIB. I've had a couple of requests for that. You just can't. You just have got to stop it and let it ride itself out. You can't admit someone for 2 weeks to come off LAIB. It doesn't work like that. Then the next issue you've got to understand is what are they going to jumping on? What are they jumping off to? So are they jumping off LAIB to methadone, to sublingual buprenorphine, or to abstinence? And then possibly also some people might want to jump off onto naltrexone, oral naltrexone. So if they're jumping off onto sublingual buprenorphine, well, you can literally start a dose of sublingual buprenorphine, right? Depending on what product, anything between 8 to 16 milligrams a day, from the time when their last injection was due, and maintain them on a long, long bridge to let the previous long tail wash out. That's one option. If they're jumping onto methadone, again, I would do it very, very slowly and cautiously, because that long tail could have an additive effect or sedative effect in addition to that expected with methadone. So I would titrate methadone at low doses very, very slowly. If they're jumping onto abstinence, well then, that's great. You get them all into psychological engagement, peer group support and all the social interactions that you need for abstinence-based therapies. If they want to go into oral naltrexone, well then you need to give it a long, long time, wait for that long tail to vanish. Then I would give them a low dose naloxone challenge, and if they didn't react to that, then I'd start on very low dose naltrexone, and then gradually every couple of days increase the dose of naltrexone to 50 milligrams.
Excellent. So in the episode today, I think we've covered pretty much the whole course of the patient journey on LAIB, commencing from dosing, when to deal with the patient who feels that they're inadequately dosed, titrating the dose of the LAIB, how to transition between the LAIB and different formulations of LAIB, how to cease someone on LAIB, and also transition from LAIB over to methadone as well. So we've covered a fair bit of information. So thank you all for your company on this episode of Cracking Addiction, and bye for now.